In 1923, in Germany, a worker receives his wages at noon, returns home, and calculates right as he steps through the door. The money he received does not even cover half the amount of bread he could have bought this morning, because from noon to evening, prices double. This is not money. This is an empty promise given to you by the state. And this is where everything takes a strange turn, because that worker looks at his bank book, there are numbers, there are tens of thousands of marks, and all these numbers are real, but there is no value. In other words, a person can be both wealthy and bankrupt at the same time. I am the bald man, the person who tells the history of money, what is in your bank today, and reads the history of that money like a mirror. If you are someone who thinks that history does not just remain behind museum glass, but on the contrary, is being lived right now in your bank account, subscribe. And if this video truly changes the way you look at money, like it. If not, don't like it. But first, watch. Because today we are going to talk about two things at the same time. The most absurd financial collapses in history and exactly where they collide in your 30s. They seem like separate topics, but they are not. They are actually two different pages of the same story. Then let's begin in the year 1715 at Versailles. France's Sun King had built a palace covered in Chinese silk, Bordeaux wine, and sugar brought from the colonies in gold leaf salons. From the outside looking in, this was definitely Europe's wealthiest state, but from the inside looking in, debt, an economy built on war booty, taxes loaded onto the backs of peasants, and an infrastructure decaying under wealth bent on ostentation. The real problem was this: France looked wealthy, but it was producing nothing of real value. Then the French treasury came to the brink of collapse, and a Scottish banker appeared on the stage, John Law. His name was that simple, but what he did was not simple at all. He became France's finance minister and launched a project under the name of the Mississippi Company, a system based on paper money that promised immense wealth in Louisiana, which in theory would provide almost infinite returns. People rushed, aristocrats rushed, merchants rushed. Everyone grew wealthy on paper. Then 1720 came, trust collapsed, and that paper wealth, when it collapsed, became so worthless that it wouldn't even provide heat. Real people with real assets, meaning landowners, those with means of production, those with a tangible skill, survived. The rest did not. Now stop for a second. Why am I telling this story? Because there is much less difference than you think between what John Law did and what a 30-year-old does today. The 30s are a period when life throws everything at you at the same time. A home mortgage, children's education, parents' health expenses, retirement account, car maintenance. You look at the bank account, there is a number, but you never think about what that number actually means. And this is exactly what the merchant in 18th century Paris did. He only looked at the number, not the value. The most dangerous financial lie is this: the number the bank tells you shows how safe you are. Think of a merchant living in Rome in the 3rd century. For years, he saved denarii, silver coins stamped with the emperor's face, reliable, legitimate. Then gradually, he realized that the emperors were lowering the silver ratio within the coin to finance war expenditures. The same money, the same size, the same face, but the value inside it was gradually decreasing. Prices rose, trust was shattered, and that merchant understood that the wealth in his hand was actually an illusion under someone else's control. This structure has never changed throughout history. It just decided to change character. And this is where everything takes a strange turn, because when we jump to America of the 1920s, we see the same scene with different characters. Stocks rising like elevators in the stock market, radio, automobile, skyscraper, as if progress is unstoppable. Bankers and speculators created wealth with debt out of nothing. Then 1929 came, and a large portion of that wealth melted away along with the market. So who were the survivors? Of course, those who had farms, those who had factories meeting basic needs, those who produced something real. The rest learned how worthless paper became in a very heavy way. Now, pull this toward your own life. What I mean by consumer debt is this: credit card debt, car loan, the installment you are still paying for the furniture you bought 3 years ago. These debts are exactly like the situation of the Versailles aristocrats. You look wealthy, but the system underneath you is decaying. Those installments of 400 to 600 liras you pay every month do not build wealth for you. It builds someone else's wealth. Calculate this figure annually. Spread it over 10 years. Even a figure stripped of interest will scare you. Clearing this in your 30s must be the #1 priority. Everything except the home mortgage, because this decade is probably the period when you reach the highest earnings of your career, and spending this energy on the gravitational pull of debt is exactly falling into the trap of the Weimar Republic. There is a number, but there is no value. But just paying off your debt is not enough. Let's come to the credit score matter, because this issue is usually misunderstood. A credit score of 800 and above is not just a number. This is the price of how much a system trusts you, and this trust reflects directly into your pocket. The price of the exact same house in the same neighborhood with the same square footage can create tens or even hundreds of thousands of liras of difference in its 10-year total cost, depending on the interest rate. A half-point difference means tens of thousands of dollars 40 years later. And think about this: a single late payment, skipping a month, can result in remaining on your credit report for 7 years. A moment of distraction affects you in every big decision you make for the next next decade. This is like trusting a speculative paper in 18th century Paris. You lose something you could actually control because you didn't pay attention. Follow invoice due date strictly. Keep your credit utilization rate below 30%, ideally below 10%. Do not close your old card because the length of credit history contributes to the score. These are simple things, but most people don't do them. History has also taught us that the greatest losses usually stem from small details that are ignored. Let's look at Japan at the end of the 1980s. The world saw this country as unstoppable. The land beneath the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was calculated to be of higher value than the real estate value of all of California. The Japanese bought the Rockefeller Center in New York. Golf courses in Hawaii entered the portfolios of Japanese firms. On paper, everything was perfect. Then 1991 came. Its balloon burst. Trillions of dollars of wealth evaporated in an instant. Stock prices fell by over 70%. Real estate values could not recover for decades. But Japan did not disappear. Why? Because they had a real value. A highly skilled labor force, a fabrication culture that manufactures with quality and precision, a knowledge base accumulated over decades. This value could not prevent the speculative bubble from bursting, but it carried the country to recovery. And this explains exactly why building an emergency fund in your 30s is not just a recommendation, but a necessity. In your 20s, keeping 3 to 6 months of expenses was enough. In your 30s, it is necessary to increase this range to 6 to 12 months, because in this decade, the list of potential crises grows dramatically. The house water heater break, the child needs emergency dental treatment, a major breakdown occurs in the car engine, an unexpected medical bill arrives for an elderly parent. But the emergency fund has a more important function. It gives you negotiating power. You can speak from a position of strength. You don't panic when you want to leave a job. When a big opportunity arises, you can evaluate it without hesitation. Japan's fabrication culture gave the country a baseline after the crisis. Your emergency fund gives you the same baseline. And keep this money in a deposit or a high yield savings account. Not to get rich, but to protect what melts and to keep your room for maneuver. Oh, let's move on to the retirement issue. But first, I need to go back to history because this topic is very deeply connected with one another. The wealthiest senators of ancient Rome owned large lands, but their real power came from controlling the resources the city needed: wheat, olive oil, and beverages. As the denarius lost value, those who only saved money lost their purchasing power, but those who held control of production maintained enough of their influence. This principle lies at the core of the retirement account as well. It is said that when you reach 40, you should have savings equal to about 3 times your annual salary. If you take the earnings of an average 40-year-old individual as a base, this figure points to a serious level. But the importance of this figure stems not from the figure itself, but from what it means: the minimum fuel required for compound interest to start working for you. At age 40, with this saving accompanied by consistent contribution, it is possible to reach a portfolio of millions of dollars in retirement. But every delayed year takes away a life's growth. Starting early has a much more powerful effect than receiving a big salary. The only way to explain this with mathematics is this: starting an investment 10 years early can be more effective than doubling the contribution amount. Time is money's most secret multiplier. When you are 30 years old, with every raise you get, with every job change, with every bonus, increase your retirement contribution rate by a certain amount. Going from 10% to 15% looks small. 25 years later, this difference can be the difference between a comfortable retirement and still working at 65. And this is where everything takes a strange turn, because the vast majority of people follow lifestyle inflation instead of tracking their retirement savings. Economists call this lifestyle creep. You translate it like this: the habit of spending more as you earn, but never saving more. I've seen people receiving 6-figure salaries and still feeling tight. A $70,000 vehicle, an apartment whose monthly rent exceeds most people's annual salary, eating out every night. Then the end of the month comes and they look at their accounts wondering, how do I have no savings? This is the modern version of the 18th century French aristocracy. They look wealthy, but they have no real value. And when the market turns and tremor comes, it collapses like a sandcastle. The solution is not starving. The solution is automation. Every time you get a raise, direct at least half of the increase straight into your savings and investment account. Never see the money you can spend, because the brain does not miss the money it doesn't see. And this is where the two transcripts merge, because one talks of history, the other of your 30s, but both say the same thing. Real wealth does not lie in the numbers given to you by a system you cannot control, but in the value you create. What can this value be? A skill that cannot be easily replicated, a production capacity that people need in every economic climate, accessible networks and relationships, sustainable physical health. It is necessary to get into the health matter, because this is probably the area least mentioned in financial advisory videos, but has the greatest impact. The average person spends astronomical figures on healthcare expenses throughout life. If you can reduce 20% of this figure, meaning doing less than what 1 in 5 people do, with preventive health, that figure stays in your pocket decades later. Also, lost days are not included in the calculation. Opportunities missed due to illness, dropping productivity, early burnout. The 30s are the period when the metabolism begins to take you out of the game. But at the same time, it is the most efficient period when habits can still be shaped. Sustainable movement, setting the foundations of nutrition correctly, sleep quality, stress management. These are investments that prevent major medical expenses to be made 10 years later. And this investment offers a much more predictable return than any stock. We said Japan's real value lay in its highly skilled human power. Your real value also largely lies in a healthy and functional body. Putting this on the back burner is slowly eroding your production capacity. It is also necessary to touch upon the child education fund matter, but let's handle this from a specific perspective. In the last 30 years, college education costs have increased at twice the speed of general inflation. If this trend continues, the college expenses of a child born today will be far above current figures. Starting now, even with small amounts, allows compound interest to work for 15 to 18 years. Tax advantages offered by special accounts designed for education make the saving even more efficient. But there is a bigger issue here. The most valuable thing you give to your child is not an account balance. It is ensuring they understand what money is, what value is, how the system works, because the person who understands does not become that fragile. We said Japan's recovery was in its educated workforce. Education became the baseline after the crisis. And now we come to the most important moment of this video, because here I really need to stop. All those wealths destroyed throughout history, all those collapsed bubbles, all that evaporated paper richness have a common denominator. People confuse wealth with value. They thought the number the bank told them was real security. They counted the game of the system as the indicator of how safe they actually were. French aristocrats drowned inside fake wealth. Mississippi company investors saw how fast paper burns with fire. Weimar workers stood in front of a loaf of bread that their savings could not buy. 1929 speculators experienced the stocks they believed would be higher tomorrow becoming worthless at midnight. And when it comes to 2008, millions of homeowners understood that the house, which was their asset, was actually an overvalued piece of concrete covered with debt they could not pay. Banks initiated foreclosures, prices collapsed, the illusion of security shattered with the dust. The system was not designed for your freedom. It was designed for its own continuity. And this system wants you to focus on numbers, because numbers can be manipulated. Value, not so easily. Now let's connect this to this. Why making a comprehensive financial plan is so important? Because without a plan, everything that comes to your mind when talking about financial assets remains as independent pieces. The retirement account is here. The emergency fund is there. The credit score is over there. The child education fund is in another corner. And if you manage these like separate boxes rather than a system, you can never see how they interact with each other. Let's also touch upon the matter that there is an estate planning here. It sounds morbid, I know, but it is necessary to understand that this is not death planning. This is protection planning against life's unpredictable turn. In a moment of an accident, who makes the decisions? If neither exists, who looks after the children? What happens to the retirement account, the house, the life insurance? If you don't answer these questions, it means the court answers them. And the court does not know your priorities. Basic documents, a simple will and power of attorney can be prepared much faster and cheaper than most people think. Waiting for the perfect moment to start is not starting. When it comes to the matter of financial confidence in your 30s, this is not a number. This is a state of mind. Financial confidence means this. You don't wake up at 3 in the morning and worry, is it enough for retirement? You don't panic when the market shakes. You don't lose your options when an unexpected expense arises. You make life's big decisions not under money pressure, but within understanding. This confidence does not come on its own. It comes from the existence of systems. It comes from knowing your numbers. And the biggest contradiction here is this. The people who should possess financial confidence the most are usually the ones who feel it the least, because owning a large portfolio does not mean understanding the system. And history gives its most important lesson exactly at this point. The survivors of the Weimar inflation were not those who saved the most money, those who carried value outside of money, those who had land, those who held foreign currency, those who possessed a skill that others needed to survive. In the Great Depression, farmers and craftsmen were more resilient than owners of abstract assets. This principle is still valid today. The form of value changed, but the importance of value did not change. Possessing a skill is something that will continue to see demand even if automation comes. Real relationships, networks that provide opportunities and protection, productive assets that meet basic human needs. These are things that carry a meaning independent of the course of the market. An interesting irony is this. The people who try to look wealthy the most are usually the most fragile ones. History shows this very clearly. From the 18th century French nobles to the Gilded Age's American robber barons to the dot-com bubble stock millionaires, all were wealthy until they weren't. Wealth is not worthless, but wealth without value is a sandcastle, because history has an old game and it is playing this game again. Every generation does the exact thing simultaneously that they said nobody would act like this, and wakes up on the other side of the system, just with a different currency. The 30s are critical for this reason, because the decisions of this decade largely determine what you will encounter in your 50s and 60s. And making these decisions not with panic, but with understanding means exactly this. You see the system, not just the numbers. If you think you are left behind, let this leave you go. You cannot continue driving by looking at your past financial decision. This is like trying to drive this car by only looking at the rearview mirror. Instead, start from one or two areas. Maybe consumer debt, maybe that high yield savings account you've been delaying for 6 months. Small but consistent steps compound, just like investment. Now I will tell you one last thing, and think about this well. It is said that history does not repeat itself, but if you don't understand it, it crushes you just like the crowds that became history. Every period wears a different costume. Sometimes a Mississippi company, sometimes a dot-com bubble, sometimes real estate derivative product, but the underlying mechanism is the same. And the moment you begin to see this mechanism, you are now a different player. Building value takes time. Wealth accumulation also takes time. But if there is no real value inside wealth, that wealth is nothing more than the price of an illusion. And this is not something you are learning for the first time. This is the oldest lesson of history. And each generation only rediscovers this when their own money evaporates. Now a question remains in your head. And the answer to this question is in the videos on my channel